My parents laughed at my wedding dress right in the center of the fitting room, calling it cheap trash. They had no idea that every single stitch was part of a $60,000 trap designed specifically for them. I stayed silent while they mocked me, savoring the irony. When I finally walked down that aisle, I will not just be a bride, I will be the architect of their total destruction. My name is Morgan Ellery, and at 34 years old, I still felt the familiar tightening in my chest as I drove my dented Honda Civic across the county line. The drive from my small rental in Briar Falls to the manicured lawns of Weston Heights was only 45 minutes, but it felt like traveling between two different planets. My front bumper was held on by hope and a few zip ties, a stark contrast to the sleek luxury SUVs lining the driveways of my parents' neighborhood. I glanced at the passenger seat where a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon sat. It had cost me $80. It was a ridiculous expense given my tight budget, but I had been trained well. You do not show up to the Ellery household empty-handed, even if your bank account is bleeding. It was the price of admission. I parked on the street to avoid leaking oil on their pristine paver driveway. When I walked through the front door, the air inside was cool and smelled of expensive potpourri. My mother, Daphne, did not even look up from her phone. "You're late," she said, her voice flat. "I got stuck in traffic on the interstate," I said, holding out the wine. "I brought this for my father." Grant walked past me, snatching the bottle without making eye contact. "Kitchen," he grunted. "The caterers bailed on the appetizers. Go make yourself useful so you aren't just standing there being in the way." I went to the kitchen. That was my place. For the next 2 hours, I became invisible. In the dining room, I could hear the clinking of silverware and the boom of my brother Miles's laughter. My younger sister, Tessa, was recounting some vacation story, her voice high and demanding attention. I scraped plates. I cut the cheesecake. I refilled water glasses. When I brought out the dessert, nobody said thank you. They just took the plates. As I was clearing the main course, my elbow bumped a gravy boat. A splash of brown sauce hit the expensive beige rug. "For God's sake," Morgan Daphne snapped. "Can you do nothing right?" I dropped to my knees immediately, scrubbing at the stain with a cloth. That was when I saw the flash. I looked up to see Tessa holding her phone out. "Recording me?" She was smirking. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. "Just documenting reality," Tessa said, her thumb tapping the screen, and posted. Caption reads, "The budget queen at work. Some of us are born to serve, I guess." She laughed, and Miles joined in. It was not a warm laugh. It was the sound of people who enjoyed seeing something small stay small. I stood up, the wet rag dripping in my hand. I used to think they treated me this way because I was not successful enough or pretty enough, but looking at their sneering faces, I realized the truth. They did not hate me because I was a failure. They hated me because for the first time in my life, I was building something they did not own. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands shaking slightly. It was Caleb. "You okay? I just saw your mom tag me in a really weird post." My stomach dropped. They were not just mocking me to my face anymore. They were reaching out. They were touching the one thing I had kept pure. I understood then that this was not just a bad dinner. This was the opening move of a campaign. They were going to try to ruin my wedding by manipulating the man I loved. I looked out at them in the living room. Grant was pouring himself another glass of the wine I had bought. Daphne was showing Miles something on her tablet. They looked like a perfect family. I retreated back into the kitchen and stood under the harsh fluorescent light. The laughter from the other room drifted in, sounding muffled and distant. I washed the last dish and dried my hands. I finally understood the game. They wanted to break Caleb so they could keep me broken. "I'm done!" I whispered to the empty room. "I am not going to ask you to love me anymore." My financial entrapment did not begin with the wedding drama. It started when I was 17 years old. That was the year Daphne sat me down and explained that living under the Ellery roof was a privilege that required a subscription fee. For nearly 2 decades, I had been forced to use a supplementary credit card attached to the main family account for my daily expenses, while my actual paycheck from my jobs was funneled into a general fund that Daphne managed. She called it efficiency. I called it robbery. Family is an investment, Daphne liked to say while sipping wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. We poured resources into you, Morgan. It is only natural that the return on investment flows back to the shareholders. The irony was that the shareholders were bleeding the company dry. I worked as a senior auditor at Northwind Compliance Group. It was not a glamorous job. It did not have the prestige of Grant's vague consulting gigs or the social flash of Tessa's influencer attempts, but it was solid. I made good money. Yet, whenever I mentioned my work, they looked at me with pity. It sounds so clerical, Daphne had said during the appetizer course, waving a cracker dismissively. But I suppose someone has to do the paperwork. Grant leaned forward, his face flushed. Speaking of paperwork, we need to discuss the allocation for next month. Don't be selfish. Morgan, we have a significant expenditure coming up. I expect you to step up. He did not say what the expense was. He never did. He just used the word selfish like a weapon, knowing it was the one thing I was terrified of being. I looked across the table at Tessa. She was admiring a new diamond ring on her right hand, twisting it under the chandelier light. A designer handbag sat on the floor next to her chair. It still had the tag on the handle. Nice bag, I said, testing the waters. Tessa didn't even look up. It's essential for my brand image. You wouldn't understand. Morgan. You still shop at outlets. Anyway, how much did you transfer this month? I need to book a spa weekend for my followers to see. I can't look. Stressed. I gripped my fork until my knuckles turned white. They were talking about my salary as if it were a public utility. I kept my mouth shut, but my brain was suddenly very loud. I was doing the math. Grant's consulting firm hadn't landed a contract in 6 months. Daphne's socialite club fees were due. Tessa's credit card bill must have been astronomical. They were not just asking for money. They were desperate for it. Later that night, the living room quieted down as the liquor took hold. I was in the kitchen, pretending to wipe down the counters, but I was listening. Miles, my brother, had slumped onto the sofa with a glass of scotch in his hand. He was heavy with drink, his eyes half closed. Dad's stressing too much. Miles slurred, his voice carrying into the hallway. That loan. If we didn't have Morgan's flow, Mom would sink. She'd sink us all. I froze. I stopped breathing. Loan. What loan? I finished cleaning in a trance. When I finally retreated to the guest room, my old bedroom, which had been turned into a storage space for Daphne's yoga equipment, I did not go to sleep. I opened my laptop. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden, icy clarity. I logged into the joint account, the one Daphne had opened for me when I was a minor. I was supposed to have been removed from it years ago, but they had insisted on keeping it open for emergencies. I scrolled through the history. My eyes widened. There were transfers going out to a shell company I didn't recognize. There were withdrawals at casinos. And then there was a series of massive payments to a private equity firm that smelled like a high-yield scam. They were not just spending my money. They were leveraging my credit score to cover a debt that was spiraling out of control. I closed the laptop. I did not cry. I did not storm downstairs to scream at them. I sat in the dark, listening to the house settle. A strange, cold sensation washed over me. It was the absence of love, finally replaced by the presence of a plan. You want an investment, I whispered to the dark screen. I'll give you a return. You will never forget. The blue light of my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating my small apartment in Briar Falls. I had left my parents' house an hour ago, but the adrenaline was still humming under my skin like a live wire. I logged into the joint bank account, the digital ledger that had tethered me to my family for 17 years. What I saw was not a bank statement. It was a crime scene. I scrolled through months of transactions. It was worse than I had imagined. There were withdrawals for Tessa's brand maintenance, which apparently included $300 facials and trips to high-end boutiques. There were cash withdrawals made by Daphne at local casinos, but then I saw the recurring payments that made my blood run cold. Every 2 weeks, $5,000 was being wired to an entity called Titan Wealth Strategies. I ran a quick search on my phone. The website was a generic template filled with stock photos of handshakes and gold bars. It was a classic high-yield investment scam. And my father, the self-proclaimed financial genius, was dumping my salary into a black hole. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was the same terrified girl who believed them when they said I owed them my life. They were wrong. For the last 2 years, I had been siphoning off my quarterly bonuses and tax returns into a high-yield savings account at a completely different bank. I had opted for paperless statements sent to a secure email address they did not know existed. It was my freedom fund. It was enough to rent a new place, cover my living expenses for 6 months, and pay for the wedding I actually wanted. I opened a new tab. I initiated a transfer. I did not take everything. I left exactly $10.50 in the account. It was not a mistake. It was a message. I moved $42,000, every cent I had contributed over the last 3 years, into my secret account. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. Transfer successful. 3 minutes later, my phone lit up. It vibrated so hard against the table, it sounded like an angry hornet. A text from Daphne appeared on the lock screen. "You ungrateful thief, put it back, that is family money." Then another, "I will call the police." "Morgan, how dare you steal from us after everything we did for you?" I did not reply. I did not feel the urge to defend myself or cry. Instead, I took a screenshot. I opened a folder on my desktop I had named Evidence and dragged the image file into it. Then I did the same for the bank statements, highlighting the transfers to the scam company and Tessa's shopping sprees. My phone rang. It was Caleb. I picked up, my voice steady. "Hey, Morgan." Caleb sounded breathless, like he had been running. I don't know what's going on. Your mom is blowing up my phone, screaming that you emptied their accounts. Do you trust me, I asked. The line went silent for a second. Of course I do. But what I just got an email from your dad, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He sent it to my work address. Morgan. He attached a document claiming you have a gambling addiction. He said you're unstable and greedy. He told me that for my own financial safety, I should reconsider the marriage. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. The coldness inside me solidified into something harder than ice. They were not just trying to get the money back. They were scorching the earth. They wanted to isolate me. They wanted to destroy my credibility so that when I finally spoke the truth, no one would believe me. They did not just want my paycheck. They wanted to own me, body and soul. And they were willing to destroy the man I loved to keep their property. Forward the email to me, I said. Morgan, this is insane. What are we going to do? We aren't doing anything tonight, I said, looking at the cursor blinking in my evidence folder. Just send me the email, Caleb. And don't reply to them. Not a single word. I hung up the phone. The apartment was silent again. I looked at the $10.50 remaining in the joint account on my screen. It was the price of a cheap bottle of wine. It was all they were ever going to get from me again. By 9 a.m, my phone had become a grenade I was afraid to touch. It started with a notification from Facebook. Tessa had posted a long, tearful status update. She did not tag me directly, but she didn't have to. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. I am heartbroken to say that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. My sister has decided to cut off our elderly parents and, worse, she emptied the family emergency fund that was meant for their medical care just to fund her wedding. I never thought greed could look like family. It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. But the comments were worse. My Aunt Linda, who hadn't sent me a birthday card in 10 years, wrote about how disappointed she was. Friends of the family, people who had known me since I was in diapers, were piling on with prayer hands emojis and comments about how money changes people. They were painting me as a monster, and they were enjoying every second of it. Then came the attack on Caleb. My fiancé sent me a screenshot from his Instagram DMs. Tessa and Daphne had created burner accounts. They were spamming him with cropped images of the bank transfer I had made the night before, labeling it theft and embezzlement. They were messaging his followers. They were trying to humiliate him into leaving me. I can handle this, I whispered to myself in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. I just need to get through the workday. I was wrong. The war had already arrived at Northwind Compliance Group. At 10:30, I was summoned to the HR director's office. The walk down the gray hallway felt like a march to the gallows. Mrs. Higgins sat behind her desk, her face unreadable. Morgan. We received a call this morning on the ethics hotline, Mrs. Higgins said, folding her hands. An anonymous source claimed you are involved in a significant financial fraud investigation involving elder abuse. The room spun. They had called my job. They were trying to starve me out. That is a lie, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steady it. My family is... We are going through a personal dispute. They are trying to leverage my employment to force me to give them money. We value you, Morgan, Mrs. Higgins said, her tone cooling. But Northwind relies on absolute integrity. We cannot have our auditors associated with financial scandal. Keep your personal life personal. If this blows back on the firm again, we will have to have a very different conversation. I walked out of that office feeling naked. I felt like everyone was staring at me, wondering if I was a thief. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was not going to cry. Crying was for victims. I was not a victim anymore. I was a defendant preparing for trial. When I got back to my desk, Sarah, the receptionist, walked by. She dropped a small yellow sticky note on my keyboard and didn't make eye contact. Check your email. File attached. I opened my inbox. There was an audio file from the main switchboard recording system. I put my headphones on and pressed play. I need to report an employee, a male voice said. It was deep, confident, and unmistakably my father, Morgan Ellery. She's embezzling funds. You need to fire her before she steals from you, too. I hit pause, my heart hammered against my ribs, but a strange smile touched my lips. Grant Ellery, in his arrogance, had forgotten that corporate lines are recorded for quality assurance. He had just handed me irrefutable proof of tortious interference with my employment. He had just broken the law. I saved the file to 3 different cloud drives and my evidence folder. That evening, I drove to a diner 2 towns over to meet Aunt Marlene. She was Daphne's sister, but they hadn't spoken in 15 years. Marlene had been excommunicated for refusing to lend Grant money for a failed real estate venture. She sat in the booth, smoking a cigarette despite the sign on the wall, looking at me with tired, knowing eyes. I told her everything, the account, the lies, the call to HR. Marlene didn't look surprised. She just took a long drag of her cigarette and blew the smoke away from me. You are waiting for them to apologize, Marlene said. You think if you show them enough proof, they will feel bad. I just want them to act like parents. I said, just for once. Marlene reached across the sticky table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight, almost painful. Listen to me, Morgan. You need to kill that hope right now because it is going to get you killed. You are not their daughter. She leaned in, her eyes hard as flint. To Grant and Daphne, you are just an asset class. You are not their child. You are their revenue stream. And right now, you are a malfunctioning ATM that they are trying to kick until it starts spitting out cash again. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. It was the most brutal thing anyone had ever said to me. And it was the first time in my life I felt completely seen. Okay, I said, picking up the menu. Then let's close the bank. The next morning, Aunt Marlene drove me into the city to meet Harper Sloan. Her office was nothing like the chaotic, emotionally charged atmosphere of my parents' house. It was a fortress of glass and steel, smelling faintly of espresso and expensive leather. Harper did not look like a therapist who wanted to hear my feelings. She looked like a shark in a tailored cream suit. I laid out everything on her mahogany conference table: the screenshots of Tessa's posts, the emails from Grant to Caleb, the bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers, and finally, the audio file of my father calling my employer. Harper listened to the recording in silence. She didn't frown. She didn't gasp. She just tapped her pen against the table, a rhythmic, predatory sound. "This is excellent," Harper said, finally looking up. Usually, in defamation cases, we have to prove malicious intent, which is slippery. But this calling your employer to accuse you of a crime you didn't commit, that is tortious interference with a contract. They didn't just cross the line, they nailed their own coffins shut. I shifted in my chair, gripping my purse. I need to be honest. I don't have $50,000 for a retainer. My savings are tied up in the wedding and... Well, surviving? Harper waved a hand dismissively. I don't want your savings, Morgan. I want theirs. We will structure this as a fixed fee with a contingency clause for damages. When we win, and with this evidence, we will include a demand that they cover all legal costs. They are going to pay me to sue them. She pulled a file closer, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the bank history I had printed out. Wait, Harper said, pointing to a line item from 10 years ago. This account was opened when you were 14. You were a minor. Who was the custodian? My mother. I said. And these withdrawals, Harper continued, tracing a finger down the page. Tuition refund insurance settlement. These checks were deposited into your name and then immediately transferred to a joint account with Grant Ellery. Morgan, this isn't just theft. This is long-term financial abuse. They have been using your identity as a credit mule since you were in high school. I felt a wave of nausea, but I pushed it down. I was done being sick. I picked up the pen. Where do I sign? I asked. Harper slid a document across the table. Representation agreement. I signed my name at the bottom. The ink was black and permanent. In that moment, I felt a shift in the universe. I was no longer Morgan the daughter, the victim, the doormat. I was Morgan Ellery, the plaintiff. Here are the rules, Harper said, her voice sharp. You do not block them. You do not reply to them. You let the calls go to voicemail, and you save every single one. If you see them on the street, you walk away. You are a vault. From this second forward, your voice is me. By 2 p.m, Harper had sent cease and desist letters via certified courier to Daphne, Grant, Tessa, and Miles. The letters were brutal in their simplicity. They demanded the immediate removal of all social media posts, a retraction of the statements made to Caleb and my employer, and a complete cessation of all contact. I expected them to be scared. I expected silence. I underestimated their arrogance. At 5 o'clock, Harper called me. Check Instagram, she said. I opened the app. Tessa had posted a photo of the legal letter lying on her kitchen counter next to a half-eaten bagel. She had circled Harper's signature in red digital ink. The caption read, My sister is actually trying to sue her own family because she doesn't want to pay her share. Imagine needing a lawyer to talk to your mom. Pathetic victim card beneath it. Daphne had commented, We have nothing to hide. Let her waste her money. My heart started to race. They posted it. They are mocking the legal warning. I could hear the smile in Harper's voice through the phone. It was cold and terrifyingly calm. Good, Harper said. Let them laugh. Judges hate it when defendants mock the legal process. They just turned a private warning into public libel. Keep screenshots of everything. Morgan, the more they talk now, the bigger the check is going to be later. We decided to treat our wedding not as a celebration, but as a classified operation. Caleb and I burned the original guest list. We canceled the booking at the country club my mother had insisted upon and secured a new, unlisted venue. We invited only 30 people. These were friends who had held my hand while I cried and colleagues who had vouched for my integrity during the HR investigation. It was a circle of trust to everyone else, including my family. The wedding was canceled, or at least that was what we let them believe until we were ready to spring the trap. For the dress, I drove 2 hours north to Riverton. It was a quiet, industrial town that had seen better days, but hidden inside a converted textile mill was an atelier with no signage. I knocked on the heavy steel door. Sabine Leroux opened it. She was a tiny woman with sharp eyes and pins stuck into the lapel of her blazer. She had trained under a legendary couturier in Paris before retreating from the public eye to work strictly by referral. I had gotten her name from Harper, my lawyer, who knew exactly the kind of weapon I needed. "You are the one who wants the invisible dress," Sabine said, her accent faint but precise. "I want a dress that looks like nothing," I said, stepping into the studio. "I want them to look at it and see a discount rack item. I want no lace, no beading, no train. I want it to be so simple that my mother will laugh when she sees it." Sabine smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. She walked over to a mannequin draped in a fabric that moved like liquid smoke. To the untrained eye, "Simplicity looks cheap," Sabine said, running her hand over the silk. But to the expert, "This is double-faced silk crepe, woven in a mill in Italy that produces less than 500 yards a year. The structure is supported by horsehair braiding that is hand-stitched into the seams. It will fit you not like clothing, but like a second skin." She handed me the sketch. It looked stark, boring, even, but the price tag at the bottom read $60,000. "This is insane," Caleb said later when I showed him the estimate. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were getting deeper. "Morgan, $60,000. We could put a down payment on a house. Are you doing this just to, I don't know, bait them? It is not just a dress." "Caleb," I said, taking his hand. "It is a legal asset. Sabine has agreed to testify to the value and the craftsmanship in court if necessary. And more importantly, she is lending it to me under a consignment agreement for the event. I am paying for the labor and the materials, but the valuation, that is the trap. When they mock it, when they destroy its value publicly, they won't be mocking a $100 dress. They will be destroying a piece of high art." Caleb looked at me, searching my face. "I just want you to be happy. I don't want our wedding to be a sting operation. I can't be happy until I am safe," I said quietly. "And I won't be safe until they learn that hurting me has a cost they cannot afford." The next week, I went for the first fitting. While I was standing on the pedestal, a woman with a notebook wandered into the studio. She was a client of Sabine's from years ago, a freelance fashion journalist named Zoe. She stopped dead when she saw the fabric pinned to my body. "My God," Zoe whispered, stepping closer. "Is that the Vicenza silk? I haven't seen that since the Milan shows in 2019. Who are you?" "No one," I said sharply, "and no press." "This is a story," Zoe said, her eyes lighting up. "A bride wearing a fortune disguised as a slip dress." "It's subversive, not yet," I said, "but keep my number. You might get a much better story in a few weeks." I turned back to the mirror. The woman staring back at me was wearing a dress that looked plain, boring, and utterly forgettable to a narcissist. But I knew the truth. Every thread was a tripwire. I was not looking at a bride. I was looking at the lead prosecutor in the trial of my own life. Harper dropped the lawsuit on my parents like a guillotine. It was not a warning letter this time. It was a formal civil complaint filing for defamation, tortious interference with contractual relations, harassment, and a claim for unjust enrichment regarding the years of financial abuse. The discovery phase began immediately. We subpoenaed everything. We asked for bank statements, text message histories, email logs, and phone records. Because my parents were already drowning in debt. They made a fatal error. They decided to represent themselves. They did not have the money for a defense attorney, so they had to answer Harper's demands personally. That was when the secret started to bleed out. I sat in Harper's office surrounded by boxes of financial records that the court had forced my father to turn over. "Look at this," Harper said, sliding a document toward me. "Your father took out a second mortgage on the house 5 years ago. A massive one? Almost $200,000. I stared at the paper. Daphne doesn't know about this. She thinks the house is paid off. She brags about it constantly. She knows now, Harper said dryly. And look where the payments from your joint account went. You weren't contributing to groceries. Morgan, your salary was being used to pay the interest on a secret loan so your father could pretend he was still solvent." My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from the family group chat. A thread I had not left because Harper told me to stay and watch. It was a message from Tessa. She must have meant to send it to Miles privately, but panic makes people careless. "If we lose this lawsuit, we are going to have to sell the house anyway. There is nothing left. Dad ruined us." I took a screenshot immediately. 10 seconds later, the message was deleted, but it was too late. I saved it to the evidence folder. They were cracking? Later that afternoon, Miles called me. I almost didn't answer, but I hit record and picked up Morgan. Miles sounded wrecked. His voice was thick, like he had been crying or drinking. "Look, I wanted to say I'm sorry. Mom made me write those comments on Facebook. You know how she gets. She said if I didn't back her up, she would cut me off too. You are 36 years old." "Miles," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. I know. Okay. But you have to stop this lawsuit. They are talking about bankruptcy. Just drop it, and I'll make them leave you alone." "I don't want your apologies," I said. "If you are really sorry, you will sit in a deposition chair and say exactly what you just told me under oath. You will tell the court that Daphne coerced you into libeling me. I can't do that to Mom," he stammered. "Then don't call me again," I said, and hung up. The final blow came an hour later. Harper found a dormant account in the records from a bank I didn't recognize. It was labeled Morgan Education Trust. "It was opened when you were 6, Harper said, her voice unusually soft. "Your grandmother left it for you. It had nearly $40,000 in it by the time you graduated high school. I never got a dime. I said I took out student loans. I am still paying them off." Harper turned the page. "That is because your father liquidated the entire trust 3 weeks after your 18th birthday. The memo on the withdrawal just says household improvements. They remodeled the kitchen with your college degree." I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and cold. It wasn't about the money. I could earn money. It was the realization that from the moment I became a legal adult, they had looked at my future and decided it was less important than new granite countertops. They had cannibalized my life to decorate their own. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I was not crying. I was past tears. "They are not going to settle," Harper said behind me. "They are cornered animals. They are going to try to ruin the wedding because it is the only leverage they have left. They think if they humiliate you enough, you will drop the suit." I turned around. "Let them come." Harper smiled. "That is the spirit. We will not block them at the door. We will let them walk right in. We will turn your wedding into the scene of the crime and let them expose themselves in front of every witness we need." 3 days before the wedding, the email arrived in my inbox at 2 a.m. It was from Daphne. The subject line was simply truce. "Morgan, please. This has gone too far. We are family. Let us come to the wedding. I promise we will sit in the back and be silent. I just want to see my daughter. I can't bear this anymore." It was the kind of message that would have broken me 5 years ago. It was perfectly calibrated to target my guilt. But I did not reply. I forwarded the email to Harper. By noon, my lawyer had sent a registered response stating that any attempt to enter the venue would be considered a violation of the harassment protocol and would result in immediate police intervention. They did not take the rejection well. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone started buzzing with confused texts from my friends. Tessa had been busy. She had created a fake digital invitation and circulated it to everyone she could find in my contact list, claiming the venue had changed to the Grand Oak Hotel due to a plumbing emergency. She is trying to scatter our guests, I said, pacing the living room of our new apartment. She wants an empty room so she can say nobody showed up. Let them go to the Grand Oak, Caleb said, his voice calm but hard. We aren't changing the plan. We are just tightening the perimeter. We initiated the 2-layer protocol we had discussed. The Grand Oak Hotel would serve as the decoy. We let the rumor slide that the reception was happening there, but the real ceremony was locked in at Stonegate Hall, a fortress of a venue tucked away in the hills, accessible only by a private road. We sent out encrypted messages to the 30 confirmed guests with the real coordinates and a password for the security gate. Then came the call I did not expect. It was Zoe, the fashion journalist I had met at Sabine's atelier. I heard a rumor about a war in Weston Heights, Zoe said. And I did some digging. Your mother is Daphne Ellery. Right. The same Daphne Ellery who chaired the Children's Arts Gala 4 years ago. Yes, I said cautiously. I covered that gala, Zoe said, her voice dropping. It was a disaster. Suppliers weren't paid. Donations went missing. She blamed it on an administrative error, but I always knew she pocketed the difference. I couldn't prove it then. But if she is coming for you, I want to be there to see her fall. I'm not asking for a hit piece, I told her. I just want the truth recorded. I will be there, Zoe promised, and I will bring a photographer. If she causes a scene, she will be on the front page of the style section, and not in the way she wants. The pieces were falling into place. Harper called me an hour later with news that made my knees weak with relief. She had tracked down the bank manager who had overseen my joint account years ago. He had retired. But he remembered Grant Ellery perfectly because my father had frequently come in demanding overrides on withdrawal limits. He agreed to provide a sworn affidavit confirming the irregular withdrawal patterns. We had the evidence. We had the witness. We had the press. But my parents had one last card to play. We were eating a silent dinner when Caleb's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. It was his mother. He put it on speaker. Caleb, Mrs. Ward's voice sounded shaky. I just got a call from a woman named Daphne. She said, "Oh, honey," she said Morgan is in trouble with the law. She said Morgan seduced a married man at her old job and is being sued for alienation of affection, and that you need to get out before you are named as an accomplice. The room went dead silent. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They were willing to invent a sexual scandal just to shame his mother into pressuring him. Caleb did not look at me. He looked at the phone, his jaw set like stone. "Mom?" Caleb said, his voice terrifyingly even. "Listen to me very carefully. That woman is a liar. Morgan is the most honest person I know. If she calls you again, you hang up. Do you understand? We are done with them." He hung up the phone and reached across the table to take my hand. His grip was tight. He wasn't scared anymore. He was angry. I went into the bedroom and unzipped the garment bag hanging on the door. The dress inside looked simple. It looked plain. To the uneducated eye, it looked like something I had bought at a discount store for $50. I ran my fingers over the invisible seams of the $60,000 couture gown. They are going to laugh, I whispered to the empty room. They are going to point and sneer, and that laughter is going to cost them everything. Stonegate Hall was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. It was everything the Grand Oak Hotel was not private, serene, and fortified. Inside the courtyard, the air smelled of jasmine and expensive champagne. There were only 30 guests, a tight circle of people who actually knew my middle name and how I took my coffee. It was safe. There were no crying babies, no distant relatives asking for loans, just the soft hum of a string quartet warming up. But outside the iron gates, the storm I had predicted finally made landfall. I was standing on the stone terrace overlooking the driveway when a black SUV screeched to a halt. My security team, 2 large men in dark suits, stepped forward immediately, blocking the path. Daphne got out first. She was wearing a white dress. Of course she was. It was an aggressive shade of ivory, lace from neck to floor, designed to upstage a bride. Grant followed, looking red-faced and sweaty in a suit that was too tight. Then came Tessa. Phone already raised, live streaming to her 300 followers. "We are her family," Daphne screamed, her voice shrill enough to cut through the heavy oak doors. "You cannot keep a mother from her daughter's wedding. This is illegal. This is kidnapping," standing in the shadow of a large oak tree near the gate. Zoe, the fashion journalist, raised her camera. She didn't say a word. She just zoomed in. I signaled to Caleb. "It's time." We walked out onto the terrace steps. I was wearing the dress. To the untrained eye, it was a whisper of nothing. A simple column of bias-cut fabric with no sequins, no lace, no volume. It looked like something you would wear to sleep in. When Daphne saw me, she stopped screaming. She stared, and then she laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Oh my God," Daphne shouted, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Look at that. Is that a nightgown? You look like a maid." "Morgan, did you run out of money? Did you spend it all on the lawyers?" Tessa snickered, panning her phone camera toward me. "Budget bride alert. That is just sad." The guests had drifted out onto the terrace behind me. Among them was Eleanor, a quiet woman who worked as a textile appraiser for a major auction house. She was a friend of Sabine's. Eleanor leaned forward, squinting at the way the silk moved against the wind. "That isn't polyester," Eleanor whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "That is heavyweight crepe de chine. Hand-rolled hem. My God, the bias cut is perfect. That dress costs more than a car. That can't be cheap." Grant didn't hear her. He saw me standing there, looking calm, and he snapped. He lunged past the security guard, his face twisted in rage. "You ungrateful little—" Grant shouted, reaching for my arm. "You think you can embarrass us? You owe us that money. You owe us this wedding." He never touched me. Caleb stepped in front of me, catching Grant's wrist in midair. It was the first time I had ever seen Caleb physically impose himself. He didn't shove. He just held Grant's arm with a grip of iron, staring him down with cold disgust. "Do not," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. "Touch my wife." Grant froze, shocked by the resistance. Before he could speak, a car door slammed nearby. Harper Sloane stepped out of a sedan. She wasn't wearing a party dress. She was wearing her court suit. She walked up the driveway with the terrifying grace of an executioner. "Mr. Ellery," Harper said, holding out a thick manila envelope. "Mrs. Ellery." "Who are you?" Daphne spat. "I am Morgan's attorney," Harper said, thrusting the papers into Grant's free hand. "Consider yourself served. This is a supplementary summons for harassment and violation of a protected order. You were explicitly warned via certified mail not to approach this venue. You just committed a crime in front of 30 witnesses and a member of the press." Tessa lowered her phone, her face draining of color. "Wait." "She set us up." "Mom, stop talking. She set us up." But the camera was still rolling. The journalist captured the panic in Tessa's eyes, the rage in Grant's face, and the sudden, hollow fear in Daphne's expression. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't need to. I turned my back on the people who had raised me to be a bank account. The string quartet began to play the opening notes of the processional. "Ready?" Caleb asked, releasing Grant's arm and offering me his own. I have never been more ready. I said. I walked toward the aisle, the silk of my $60,000 dress flowing around me like water, leaving the noise and the anger behind at the gate. I didn't look back. I looked forward, toward the altar, where the rest of my life was waiting to begin. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. It was the perfect setting for the end of the world as my parents knew it. They sat at the defense table, huddled together, looking small without the backdrop of their expensive furniture and social standing. They had decided to represent themselves, convinced that their charm would sway a judge, the way it swayed their country club friends. It was a massacre. Harper Sloan moved through the proceedings with the precision of a surgeon. She didn't shout. She simply displayed the evidence on the large monitors. The bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers, the email from Grant attempting to sabotage my marriage, the recording of the call to my HR department, and finally, the video from the wedding. The courtroom watched in silence as Daphne screamed and Grant lunged at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure greed. "Your Honor," Harper said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "This is not a family dispute. This is a systematic campaign of harassment, financial abuse, and defamation designed to isolate the plaintiff for monetary gain." Then came the first blow that made the room go deadly quiet. The bank manager took the stand. He confirmed that the education trust left by my grandmother, which had contained nearly $40,000, was liquidated days after my 18th birthday. The withdrawal slip was signed by Grant Ellery as custodian. The manager stated, "The funds were transferred to a remodeling contractor." Grant stood up, his face purple. "That was my right I raised. Her children don't have property rights against their parents. It's a household asset." The judge looked over his spectacles at my father. His expression was one of profound disgust. "Mr. Ellery, sit down. You just confessed to misappropriating funds from a fiduciary trust on the record." But Harper wasn't done. She brought up the matter of the dress. She called the appraiser to the stand. When the expert announced that the cheap nightgown my mother had mocked was actually a commissioned couture piece worth $60,000, I heard Daphne gasp. It was a wet, choking sound. "The plaintiff did not purchase this garment for vanity," Harper explained. Pacing in front of the bench, she purchased it to demonstrate a pattern. The defendant saw something valuable, labeled it worthless because it did not fit their aesthetic, and then attempted to destroy it, just as they did with their daughter. Then came the final twist. Harper submitted an affidavit from Sabine LaRue. It detailed a phone call Sabine had received 2 weeks before the wedding. A woman claiming to be me had tried to cancel the order and requested a refund be sent to a bank account that belonged to Daphne Ellery. "This is fraud," the judge said, looking directly at Daphne. The verdict was swift. I was awarded damages for defamation, lost wages from the investigation at work, and full restitution of the stolen trust fund plus interest. The judge also granted a permanent restraining order and ordered them to pay 100% of my legal fees. Because they had no liquid cash, the court placed an immediate lien on their house in Weston Heights. The final scene of this drama didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened 2 months later at a title company. The judgment, combined with the secret second mortgage Grant had hidden, forced them to sell the house. They had to liquidate their status symbol to pay the daughter they had called a failure. I didn't go to the closing, but Harper did. She told me they looked old. She told me they signed the papers with shaking hands, finally understanding that the cheap girl had just legally acquired their entire legacy. That evening, I checked my bank app. The balance had updated. The restitution payment was there. It was a number that meant freedom. I didn't jump for joy. I didn't pop champagne. I simply exhaled. A long, shuddering breath, feeling the heavy chains of obligation finally fall off my shoulders. I transferred the retainer fee back to Aunt Marlene with a note that just said, "Thank you for seeing me." Then I walked into the bedroom. Caleb was already asleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the white box in the corner of the closet. The dress was inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. I would probably never wear it again. It didn't matter. It had done its job. I closed the closet door, shutting away the ghosts of my past. They had laughed at me, and that laughter had been the signature on their own defeat. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really want to know where you guys are tuning in from, so please drop a comment down below with your city or country. It is always awesome to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed seeing Justice Served, make sure to hit that subscribe button for the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help us get this story out to even more people.